housekeeping tips. Please turn off your video and mute your mics. This helps with background noises. And it's nothing to do with you. It just makes it a lot easier. Plus it won't use as much, it should help you in terms of your internet access too. We want to keep it also distraction free. If you want captions, click on the CC at the bottom. And if you have any questions, put in the chat. Any questions you might have, please put that in the chat. So everybody can get closed captioning. You just have to click it on and put any questions you have in the chat. The meeting has to end on time because we have classes at the next session. So we just need to make sure that we keep everything on time because, as I say, we have 45 minutes and the next session starts on the Zoom at 11 o'clock. So we just need to make sure we get everything moving. If you have questions, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. But just keep them in the chat so that we can answer them at the end. I'm going to turn it over to Cassie Frost, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. So as we were chatting before, everybody kind of was coming in. My name's Cassie Frost here in Wisconsin, enjoying the nice weather that started about 40, going up to about 70 today. It is homecoming week here. So, there's my kind of lead in. So it is homecoming week. The one over there on the left is my daughter. I have a senior this year. So homecoming week is a lot more than I remember it being. I'm also going to take just a second to introduce you to these other two furballs on the screen. Just for a frame of reference, I am obviously at home right now. The one in the middle is Bucket. She is a Basset Hound. I tell you this because she is 13 and has decided this office is hers. If you've ever been with me in any presentations from here before, you'll know that sometimes she tends to sneak in. This is her bed right behind me. She's decided the office is hers. She's 13. I'm not going to argue with her, but she does snore loudly. So if all of a sudden you see movement behind me and hear snoring, that's what's up. And the other dog here is Bones. She usually will be sleeping in the living room. You probably won't hear anything from her unless the mailman comes, at which point she's going to tell you. So just to get those couple housekeeping things out of the way. Also, as we go today, like Mary had said, go ahead and utilize the chat. I do have that down on a lower screen. So if you see me looking down, that is what I am doing. I will kind of monitor the questions. I'll answer things as I can. So if I'm in the middle of something and you have a question about it, feel free to throw it in. If it fits in, I will kind of jump into it and answer it along the way. Otherwise, I will try to catch it at the end. Also today, make sure you're going ahead and using the session notes. If you have any additional things that you want to add or questions, things that you want to tell others or ways you can answer their questions. The session handouts are also linked there in the session handouts for this session are in the session handouts document. How's that for confusing? But anyway, the link there will get you to all of my slides today. So we have 45 minutes, down to about 40 now. We have a lot to go through today. I'm going to try to give you kind of an outline of some things, a few tips, a few tricks, some ways of doing things. And then I'm going to give you my contact information at the end. If you get started with this and you're stuck somewhere, definitely feel free to reach out. So here's kind of the overarching question, as I go through today. So how much time are you wasting or struggling with every day, collecting data, documenting progress, organizing information, and then sometimes not even using it because you can't figure out what you have? So today we're going to talk about some data collection methods. We're going to talk about some different types of data. We're going to talk about discrepancy analysis as an observation, talking about measurable goals, Google Forms, Google Sheets, and how we can share our results. As you can tell, within 45 minutes, this is a lot. So we're not going to go as deep into some of these areas as others. I really want to definitely spend some time in that Google Forms and Google Sheets piece, just because there's some definite tips and tricks there that can make your life a little bit easier. So this is probably one of my all-time favorite quotes. I say that, I think I've got like 5. So this is maybe, I should say it's in my top 5 of favorite quotes. If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are our opinions, let's go with mine. And this is from Jim Barksdale, the former Netscape CEO. This quote, when I first saw it about 6 years ago, really resonated. Well, 7 years ago, really resonated with me. So I'm guessing, like me, you guys have all sat in meetings where you're trying to analyze some form of data. You're trying to make a decision about what works for a student, what doesn't work for a student, what works for a resident, what doesn't work for a resident, why we should try certain types of technology, why we shouldn't try them. And oftentimes it's a bunch of people that are very well educated with a lot of great information and all sharing their opinions. Unfortunately, because we all interact with individuals at different times in their day, or when they're more tired, when they're more awake, maybe when they're learning a different type of lesson or doing a different activity, all of our opinions may come from a very different observation. Not saying that any of our opinions are wrong, but they're not going to likely all be the same. So if we don't have data, all we're coming to at meetings or to problem solve are opinions. And at that point, why not go with mine, right? Everybody thinks they're right. So the importance of data is huge. So why do we collect data and what do we do with the data we collect? First off, we often collect data for things like determining what the appropriate device is for a student, depending on, to look at maybe our interventions that we're doing working. How is a student doing academically? How is a student doing behaviorally? When we put an intervention in place or an assistive technology tool in place, is it working? We collect data for all of those reasons. Sometimes we're really good at collecting the data, but then the follow-up is, what do we do with the data once we collect it? Oftentimes we'll collect data, we kind of see the general idea of how it's doing, and then we're kind of done with it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons for collecting data, how we can make it a little bit easier, and then how we can maybe utilize that data in the end. So for data collection, we have kind of two primary methods of collecting data. And obviously within these, there's a lot of fine detail differences, but overall there's observation and testing. So we can have formal data collection like testing. So that could be academic testing, that could be behavioral testing, that could be things like the UPAR or the DeCoste writing profile, any of those formalized testings. Some of them are more observational. I think a lot of times when we're talking about how assistive technology works for a student or their engagement with it or utilization, a lot of times we rely a little bit more on that observation piece, right? Because we're getting data from the student and we're getting feedback on how it's working. However, the important thing is that as we're gathering that data, both need to be documented. Otherwise, it starts moving into that opinion. So the student said this, or it looks like the student may be doing better with this. If we're not documenting it to have kind of that concrete record, it gets much more difficult along the way to keep track of what it is we've seen. So I like this one. I like bringing it up. It's not anything groundbreaking. I don't think you're going to run from this session going, oh my gosh, paper clips. That is the be all end all. I went to this whole conference and the best thing I learned was paper clips. However, you might. So one of the things I like talking about as we're talking about data collection, and this can become just, pages upon pages of sheets and forms and clicker systems and all of these really intensive things. But sometimes it's as simple as a paper clip. So oftentimes, if I'm doing an observation with a student or of somebody's utilization of assistive technology or their engagement, I'll do something with paper clips. So paper clips are pretty handy. They're usually around in every office, in every classroom. So if you've forgotten something, paper clips are great. And typically what I'll do is put the paper clips all in one pocket. I'll grab 15, 20 paper clips, a handful, and I'll put them all in usually it's my right pocket. And as I'm monitoring or walking around the room, kind of watching what's going on, when I see whatever it is I'm looking for, I'll simply take a paper clip out of one pocket and put it into the other. The nice thing with this is it doesn't have to be super quick. You can kind of fidget with it in your hands for a second, put it over. So it's not super obvious to anybody around you what it is you're doing, but it's a really easy way to keep track of what's happening without maybe carrying around a pad of paper and a tally mark, right? If you're doing an observation, oftentimes, if you're sitting with a tally mark, students know exactly what that means, right? They know what a tally mark on a piece of paper means because some teachers have used it on their board. Sometimes it's like a negative strike. Some students get pretty sensitive to the idea of those tally marks. Paper clips, on the other hand, are pretty unobtrusive. They keep your hands open. You don't need to carry around a clipboard or anything with you. And at the end of the observation period, you simply count how many paper clips have moved to the other pocket. So I say this today because we're going to go into some of those high-tech things like Google Forms, Google Sheets, but sometimes it's just good to recognize and go back to the fact that something as simple as a paperclip can really help your data collection. So when we're looking at data, there's a lot of different types of data that we can collect. Sometimes we might be collecting academic data. How is a student doing academically? Maybe in the area of reading or writing or math. And oftentimes, as we're talking about assistive technology, we're hoping that the technology that we're putting in place to help support a student is going to help improve their academic output. So this may be something that we're looking at. We also may be looking at behavioral data. So again, we all know that a student who is struggling often is going to display more unexpected behaviors in a classroom. So sometimes by putting assistive technology devices in place to help a student out, we may see decreases in unexpected behaviors. So we may be collecting behavioral data. Oftentimes we're collecting IEP data, right? So if a student has an IEP goal, we may be collecting data on their progress towards that IEP goal. One of sometimes the underlooked at areas on this, we also may be collecting social data. So how well is a student able to interact with their peers? And oftentimes, if we're talking about communication devices, if we are talking about visual schedules and front loading, all of these types of assistive technology tools may be something that we're working on with students' social interactions. So we may be wanting to track those. Each and every one of those can be important when we're looking at the student and the environment when we're considering assistive technology. And we all know we want to be looking at the student and that environment first before we're looking at everything else. By utilizing some observational methods and different types of data, we can start seeing how the student is doing in each one of these areas. So we know that we have different types of data to collect. We know that we can do observations or we can do formal testing. We know that we can collect data as simply as using a paperclip, but it's really hard to collect data if you don't have a measurable goal in place. So this can be something as simple as, we are going to be trialing this new, this new speech to text tool, right? This new speech to text tool to help a student write. The students kind of tried it out. They think it works for them. So we're going to try it. And maybe our goal is that this student is able to use the speech to text tool to write 3 sentences independently, X number of times a week, right? So that's a goal. We don't always think, when we think measurable goals, we automatically assume IEP stuff, but we're kind of always coming up with goals. So when we're collecting data, it really helps to have kind of a goal in mind. So we're collecting the right type of data. So can the answer to your question or goal be quantified? So if I had said we expect this student our goal is for our student to be able to write at least 3 sentences independently with this new speech to text tool, can that be quantified? Can we count the number of times? Yeah. If there's a solid answer, not an I feel answer. So what we're looking for is we don't want to go with, well, I feel like they're doing better with that. I feel like they seem to be understanding that a little bit more. I feel like, and not that feeling is bad, feeling is great, but then we start getting into that whole, if all we have are opinions, let's go with mine stuff, right? So we want to have something that we have a solid answer to. And then is the test to answer the question repeatable? So again, let's look at a couple of examples. Sally will use speech to text when writing. Okay, so if we have Sally will use speech to text when writing, is that measurable? Well, we could maybe tally how often she uses speech to text, and we could see if she's using it more often over time, but that really doesn't tell us how many opportunities she's had. And it doesn't necessarily tell us, is she getting prompts? Is she not getting prompts? We really could kind of end up in that I feel, right? So if you're in a meeting, is Sally using speech to text when writing? Odds are you're going to get a group of people around a table going, well, yeah, I feel like she is. I'm seeing her pull it out. Well, how much is she writing? Well, I don't know. It seems like it's more than before, right? And I'm guessing most of you have had those conversations. I have as well. And for kind of general purposes, it's not necessarily an awful thing. But when you're looking at making decisions, having concrete data with a measurable goal really helps. So another option would be, Sally will demonstrate an understanding of how to use speech to text by independently accessing the speech to text tool and utilizing it to write 1 sentence in 3 out of 5 opportunities. So now we have some quantifiable data. So we know that we want her to do this 3 out of 5 times. We want it to be at least one sentence, and we want her to be independent in accessing it. So there's quite a few different pieces here. But could we easily create tallies? Yes, absolutely. We can say, keep track each day of how many opportunities she had to write. So how many times we were expecting her to write. And then we can keep track of how many times was she able to independently open up her speech to text tool and write at least one sentence, right? So we're kind of tracking two things. How many times did she have the opportunity to do it? And then how many times did she successfully write one sentence? When we sit down at a meeting or with a group of people, we can say, we had this goal of Sally using speech to text when writing. And, she's been actually successful in writing a sentence 4 out of 5 times. So we're ready to move on. We're ready to keep working. This seems like this tool might be working for her. Let's see what's next, right? Or maybe, this isn't working. We're not seeing any progress with this. What supports do we need to put in place? And is this really the right tool for the student, right? Which is going to go a lot further than, well, I feel like she's using it more, right? So what should we track here? Again, Sally will demonstrate an understanding. There's our whole goal. We're probably going to want to track opportunities, usage, the prompts. Were there prompts needed? What environment was she in? The types of writing, the speech to text tool used. So as you can see underneath that general tracking, if things aren't going well, we can kind of start looking at, are there other things going on? So did she need prompts? Maybe we need to look at some of that. Was there certain environments that she wasn't using it well in? Was there certain types of writing that it wasn't working as well for? So if you're starting to see that, no, maybe you're not making that goal, you may want to look at tracking some other things. So as you can see, there's a lot of things underneath that data that you may want to be looking at. And again, if you're tracking any one of these pieces, opportunities, usage, prompts needed, environment, when you go to sit down at a table with a group of people or teachers or educators, an IEP team, and saying, is this tool working? How is it working? You're going to have a lot more information than if you just walked in and said, well, I feel like she's doing better with writing. So data is data. So what we're talking about today, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's academic, behavioral, social, tracking AT usage. The systems remain the same. It's one of the nice things about data. And, I'm going to geek out on data. It is Friday morning. Woohoo, go data. The nice thing about data is it's the same. Once you get a process in place for keeping track of data and you have a routine that works well for you, you can use it in any environment that you need to be monitoring outcome and data. So once we've written those measurable goals, we know that we have a goal that makes sense, that we can track, that we can repeat. So we're going to collect it with tallies. We're going to collect it with paper clips. How are we going to track that data? And we know we can do it over and over, right? So again, the example with Sally and her speech to text tool, can we check this weekly? Absolutely. Can we check it in different environments? Absolutely. Perfect. We know it's repeatable. Now we're getting data. We know how often Sally is keeping, or is able to do that writing. But now how do we track it? And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of time today. Because a lot of times we might be great with the paper clips. We might be great with tallies. We might be great, with our Post-it notes, our notepads, kind of jotting down how a student's doing. We might just be observing and have it in our head. But if we don't track it over time or write it down, oftentimes those Post-it notes go missing, or we're walking into a meeting with a bunch of tally marks that mean nothing to anybody other than us. So how can we track the data and set it up in a way that other people will be able to see the results of what we're trying to show? Okay. So as we get started here, I'm going to kind of move into Google Forms. I'm going to be jumping out of the presentation a little bit to demonstrate some things. So before we do that, or while I'm getting started with that, if you have access to the chat, do you want to just put in numbers 1 through 5? 1 being, I kind of know how to use a Google Sheet. I've filled one out. To 5, not Google Sheets, sorry, Google Forms. Completely re-erase that. Google Forms. Google Sheets comes later. Google Forms. 1 is I've filled out a Google form. All the way up to 5, I am like a Google form expert. That's my thing. So if you could just put 1 to 5 in the chat, it kind of tells me where to go. 1, I've filled out a Google form, maybe. 5 is I am I am on it with Google Forms. Okay. Cool. Okay, so far it looks like we're sitting 3 scores. Go ahead and keep putting those in. So that's awesome. It kind of tells me I won't go back to the very beginning of like how to create a form, but we will spend more time talking about kind of some of the details of forms, how to get the data that we're looking for out of them. Okay, so if you are going to be using Google Forms for data collection, it really helps if you can map out the questions in advance. Think about what cues you may need for yourself when you're in a hurry. Determine the frequency of form completion and be realistic with yourself. How often are you going to have time to do it? Create the form and then test the form. So I'm going to jump out of this presentation and we're going to actually go ahead and create a Google form and kind of walk through the steps of how we could do this in a way that's going to benefit ourselves. So oftentimes when somebody creates a Google form, they create a form because they want to gather information from other people and they send it out to others, right? When you're using Google Forms for data collection for yourself, you are going to basically send the form to yourself. And that doesn't mean you actually have to send it. You can use, and I'm gonna get rid of that just so we have a little more room on the screen. There we go. So this case, you're going to send the form back to you or you're going to save the link for yourself. So you're actually creating a form that's for your own use. Now, can you send it out to other people? Absolutely. If you have a team of people working with a student, you absolutely can send this out to other people to put data into it too and gather it from across environments. But you also can use this yourself when you're doing your own observations. So let's go back to this speech to text, okay? Because we have this example with Sally, so we're going to kind of stick with it. So we're going to go, with Sally example, speech to text. Okay, that works for me, right? And so what do I want to collect for information? So if I'm going to be observing Sally and seeing how is she working, across environments with this one sentence. So the very first thing that I think is probably going to be important here is to have a date, right? We want to know when was this data collected. So I'm going to go here and we're going to put in the date. Okay, make that one required. It's always good to make sure that you require the ones that you might, be tempted to skip over later. Again, for the most part, you're creating this form likely for yourself, and then kind of secondary for other people to fill out. So make sure you're leaving enough breadcrumbs that when you or somebody else are in a hurry, you're able to fill this out. This form isn't going to work for you if it takes a lot of brain power. You're going to go right back to using Post-it notes and, tallies on a sheet of paper. So we have the date. Okay, that one's great. Initially, we're probably going to just want to know how many opportunities did she have to write? And then how many times was she successful? So maybe this is going to be a daily thing, right? So I'm going to use kind of a tally method or a paperclip method in my classroom or during my observation. And I'm going to say how many times did she have the opportunity to write and how many times did she? Now we can go and make it a little more in depth from there, but we're going to start there. So our goal was, that Sally would write one sentence. So let's see, we could go ahead and say here, how opportune, I love spelling in front of people. Opportunities for writing. Okay, now, so we know we have opportunities for writing. I'm going to go ahead and turn on description. Okay, now this is important to me when I'm doing a form for data collection. So we know that in the end, on the graphs, on the charts, everywhere, we want it to read opportunities for writing. How many opportunities did she have to be writing? But when I'm in a hurry, okay, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, whenever I decide it's data collection time, I'm not going to have time to think that through. So I'm going to turn on the description by clicking on the 3 dots and turning on description. And I'm going to give myself some breadcrumbs. So how many times did she have the opportunity to write today? Okay. And now that helps me to just basically all I'm going to come in and do is answer that question. I don't have to go in and try to figure out what did I mean by opportunities for writing. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and give myself a multiple choice. Well, let's go with a drop down. So what you're going to discover as you get into forms is each type of question answer is going to give you a different type of graph at the end. This is why it's important for you to actually go back and test this form out so that if you're not getting the type of data that you want, you can go back and change this. But for right now, we're going to go with the drop down. So she might have had 0 opportunities, which would be kind of sad. And now we have a suggestion to add all. So it's going to add them all for us. Look how handy that is. Okay, and that's my required question. And then I'm going to go ahead and actually just duplicate this question because I know it's going to have the exact same answers. And I'm going to say opportunity or use of speech to text. And I'm going to say successful. Okay. And how many times did she successfully write at least one sentence with speech to text? Okay. And again, now I have all of my options. And again, I have it required. I can also then, if I want to kind of have some anecdotal stuff, so like maybe today was a hard day, maybe the computer wasn't working as well today, maybe there was something else going on that I think these results may be a little bit skewed today. So I'm also going to add a question. And this question, I'm just going to put as notes and leave it as a paragraph. I'm not going to make this one required because maybe someday I'm not going to have notes. I've decided I'm going to fill this out every day for the course of maybe 2 weeks. So now I will know, is she making progress towards the goal? Now, sometimes what I will do, if I have the example up here, under form description, I may actually write out that goal. So our goal is that Sally will be able to independently write at least one sentence utilizing, okay. Wow, look, spelling in front of people. So a lot of times I'll put the goal there. That way I can see it. So now the trick to this, once it is done and ready to go, is you're going to go up to the send option, just like if you were going to be sending this to somebody else. Except this time there is, let's see, can you see her? We got a basset hound coming in. She's not far enough back yet. So if you hear that snoring start, that's what's going on. So you can go ahead and email this to yourself. And some people really like to, they like it living in their email inbox. Unfortunately for me, I have too many emails. This is going to get completely lost. So typically what I'm going to do is grab this link, and this link then I'm either going to save as a shortcut to my desktop. I'm going to save it as a shortcut on my phone or my tablet, or some people like having a Google Doc and they save all of their links in it. So if you're tracking for maybe 4 students in a day, you might have a Google Doc with a link to each one of their forms. Again, the goal being that at the end of the day, when you are tired or at the end of the observation, that you can quickly and easily find the link to this form. So if that means it's on your desktop, as a link on your tablet, as a link in a Google Doc, that's where you're going to want to put it. Okay. So I'm going to copy that link and put it someplace useful. However, the next step here when I'm looking at what to do, okay, so map out the question, think about what cues you need. Those are those descriptions, determine the frequency. So we're going to fill it out every day, create the form, but now we want to test the form. Okay. It's important before you commit to utilizing this that you actually take the time to test it and see if it works, because there's nothing worse, very few things worse than utilizing this for data collection for a week or 2 weeks, and then sitting down and realize you never got the data you wanted from it, right? It just isn't giving what you're looking for. So now you're going into meetings or you're trying to evaluate if this trial of assistive technology is working and you don't have the data you wanted. So I'm simply going to open up a new tab and I'm going to go ahead and put in that link. Once that link is here, okay, now I can go ahead and at the end of the day, not share, no, I probably have to share permissions there, huh? Okay, update permissions. Okay, so the date is today. Today she had 4 opportunities to write, and she independently did it 1 time, no notes, submit. So another response. Okay, we're going to pretend that this is tomorrow or Monday. This time she had 7 opportunities to write. She successfully used speech out of text 4 times and submit. Okay. And I'm going to do this a couple of more times. Now there's something I'm already thinking of as I'm doing this. So she had 8 opportunities. She successfully used it 3 times. Submit. And I'm going to go through and do 1 more. Usually like 4 seems to kind of tell you if you're going to be getting the data you're looking for. She had 6 opportunities and she utilized it 4 times. Submit. Okay, so now I've put in some kind of demo data. Now I'm going to go back to my form. You can see that the 4 responses are now there. So let's click on that and look at what kind of data we've gotten. So we can see what dates data was collected. We can see that she's kind of all over the board. Opportunities for writing, 7, 25, okay. And successful use. So this is kind of difficult, right? So half the time she used it 4 times. Is this really giving the data that I want? Not super pretty here, right? So we may need to go back and look at, okay, how can we rewrite these questions so that they are more useful? So part of the issue of this is these may not match up. So some days it may be less writing, some days it may be more writing. So we may end up going back and rewording the question because we're not really getting the data that we want. So instead, our question, we may go back and say something like, on at least 3 days out of the week, Sally will be able to do this. Because now at the end of the week, we can track out of 5, how many days was she able to do it? Right? So now that's going to give us a little more of a concrete example. Or, for example, maybe she is having 3 observations, or there's 3 classes a day that you know she's going to be expected to write. So how many out of those 3 classes was she able to do this? So having a more concrete use of the opportunities. So within these 3 settings, she was able to, right? So again, sometimes when you go in and see your data, it's just not going to be what you want. That's okay. That's why you do the testing first. So you then can come back in and say, okay, I may need to reword this. So for example, maybe we want to do this weekly, right? So we would say that weekly success. And we'll say how many times, how many days did Sally successfully write? Okay, so now we're going to switch that. We know it's only 5 days, right? So we can kind of get rid of those extra days. And I'm going to actually get rid of this last question because right now we're not looking for that much detail. Okay, so now we've kind of redone this. I am going to go ahead and go click on the 3 dots, and we're going to delete all the responses, right? So we're going to start over because that first one just didn't give us what we wanted. So now we're going to start back over. I'm going to go into the demo form again. Remember, I saved the link for myself. In this case, I'll just refresh because it's changed. Okay, well, let's try this again. So now today, this week, it was 3 times she successfully did it. And then next week. Now, if you are looking at like 3 weeks of demo or so many days, you could just label it that instead of saying, the date. That sometimes is helpful. So we go with 3 weeks. How many times? Again, we're going to put in 4 examples because again, 4 kind of gives us that really good feel of is this working or not? Okay. And let's go back and look at our results again. So now this time with the changed form, I can go here and say, okay, so I can see that 75% of the time she was able to write 3 days out of the week, she was able to successfully write a sentence. Okay, cool. 25% of our testing period, she was only able to write 2. Now, this is a little more concrete data in answer to our question. If I walk into a meeting now and they say, okay, how well is this working? Throughout the week, how often is it working? You can say, you know what, right now, On a weekly basis, out of 5 days, she's successfully utilizing it 3 days out of the week. Cool. Okay, we have something to work with. We know maybe this assistive technology is working for the student, and maybe we want to start looking at why. Why isn't it working the other 2 days? How can we increase it? So now we might want to go back and put in some extra supports, or we might want to meet with the student and see maybe why isn't it every day? Maybe there's certain class periods, so you can start tracking which class periods. But again, it's always important when you're creating those questions to go ahead and do the testing, so you're sure you're going to get the information that you want. Okay. Now, a couple key points, some tips. If possible, and especially if you're going to go more in depth than just one question, always sketch out the order of your questions. So as you saw, once you create the form and start putting in data and create a spreadsheet, it's going to be more difficult to change the form. So because I was doing the testing, I could still change it, but once you actually start utilizing it, it's very hard to go back in and change the form without messing up your data. So take the time to figure out what questions do you need to ask and test it first. Also, try your form before finalizing it, just like we did. Send it to yourself, enter some fake responses. It's going to save you a lot of time. Some examples here would be maybe tracking individual student data. Okay, so we've got some theories, we've got some information on student behavior. So there's some theories that maybe the negative behaviors are arising when the student doesn't want to do it. Maybe you have all staff collecting data, it's put onto a spreadsheet. And you can look at that data now and find out when are the behaviors happening? What are the triggers? What maybe do we need to look at supporting? Okay, academic data, maybe there's essential learning targets. You create a form for that unit of study. Teacher accesses the form, does quick check-ins with students, and you can easily see where the student could be struggling. Tracking individual AT usage. So maybe a new assistive technology has been introduced to a student, they seem confident, but you want to know if it's actually being used. So a form can be created tracking opportunities for use, number of times it was used independently, the number of times assistance was needed. And then that data can be reviewed to determine if the assistive technology tool seems to be working, if more training is needed, maybe you need to have a conversation with the student. It's going to really help you know where to start. Here are some examples, and these are in the handouts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with these, but I did want to make sure that you had access in the handout. Here are some kind of outline examples of questions. So I just had somebody ask in chat a really great question. So I do want to stop before I move on to Google Forms. Somebody did ask in the chat that when I change the data collection, also the goal would need to change. Absolutely. I did not go back and do that. 100%, yes, it would need to. So here, instead of saying before, originally, my original goal was, the student will utilize it in 3 out of 5 opportunities. Now, because I changed this, how many days? So we would want to change the goal. We realized that we're going to have to change this to make it more trackable for what we want. So this time we might say that Sally will be able to successfully utilize, why can't I write that? Speech to text on 3 out of 5 days each week. And we could even say during a certain class, right? So that we're not trying to track across an entire day, because that's a lot. If I were really doing this in real life, I would probably word this again a little bit differently, because 3 out of 5 days, again, I'd probably look at maybe there's 3 classes in a day where the student is expected to write. So maybe they have to write a sentence for a warm up. And I'd probably target those and look at, there's 3 opportunities every day. How many times during those 3 opportunities was a student able to? And I'd probably track it daily. Weekly is a little bit long for this one. For the demo purposes of showing it to you, it was a little bit easier. But to be quite honest, if I were going to be truly tracking this on a student, I would probably try to find like 2 or 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a day that the student's going to have the opportunity to write. But again, for demo purposes, that would really go into the weeds of filling out the form. And 45 minutes, we don't have the time. But that was a really great question. Yes, if I'm changing my tracking, I need to make sure it's matching my goal. So you may need to go back and reword that goal a little bit. It's also great if you are on an IEP team writing goals. Sometimes this is a really good exercise to do as you're contemplating possible goals, maybe before the meeting, to kind of start wrapping your head around how do you need to word that goal as part of your IEP team so that it actually is trackable. A lot of times we write goals in IEP meetings that seem trackable, but then in reality, they're really difficult to actually get the solid data on. So as you do this more, the practice comes a little bit easier. Okay, so one of the last things kind of that I want to look at is Google Sheets. So Google Sheets can be kind of confusing. It's like, Google's version of Excel, and it can be a lot, but there's a few things that we can do with it to make data easier to work with. The very first thing we can do is click on this little green square, and it's going to actually make a spreadsheet for us from this data. So while Google Forms is phenomenal and gives us this spreadsheet where this, graph with this pretty circle and all of this information, and you absolutely can print this and take it with you to a meeting, sometimes maybe you want to have like a bar graph, or you want to have a line graph over time, or you want to be able to pick out certain things. So it's important to be able to also pull these things into Google Sheets. So a few things that you can do within Google Sheets to make data a little bit easier to see. The very first thing you can do, especially if you start getting rows and rows of data, maybe you're observing every day, so you're going to have just rows and rows. It gets really difficult to kind of see it all. So one of the first things that you can do is click on the upper left corner, which is going to select the entire spreadsheet. I'm then going to go up to Format, and I'm going to go down to Alternating Colors. I can pick all sorts of pretty colors, whatever I want to use here. But what you're going to see is that it's going to alternate my line colors. So at a glance now, it's easier to track this across each row. Okay. The second thing that I will do when I'm working on spreadsheets is maybe some of this data isn't as useful to me. So for example, the timestamp isn't as useful to me. Maybe I didn't have time on Friday to enter this and I did it the next Monday. It was still 4 this week. So really, I don't necessarily need to see all of this. It's just cluttering things up. If you hover over the top of the line and go to the little down arrow, you can click on that and you can go ahead and hide that column. Okay, so again, it's a little bit easier to see. You also then maybe want to highlight or show how often was the student successful. So again, if I highlight this row, I'm going to go to Data, Format, and go to Conditional Formatting. Now, there's a whole bunch of really cool tricks you can do with this, but for data collection, a lot of times I can go here, Format Rules, Format Cells, if it contains, or let's go greater than or equal to. If I want to know the days that it's greater than or equal to 3, so these are the days the student was successful, I can go ahead and make those rows all green. So now as this data gets filled out, I'm going to put in some mock data here. You can see that it is going to highlight automatically all of the student successes. So even if you just simply print this off and put it in, you will be able to see at a glance all of this information. So we are at that time point. I am going to highly recommend that you look through the tips here. Okay. Some of this information. Be aware that systems will change over time. So if you have a system that works really well for you, that's great. Be willing to change, but do develop a routine. Don't overcomplicate things and make sure then that you're utilizing the data that you do collect. If you get started doing this and you get confused, you get lost, anything with it, you absolutely can reach out to me at the contact information here. Thank you for your questions during the presentation. I will be around and chat here until they close this. I know there's going to be another person coming in shortly. If you have any other questions, though, I am here and you can reach out to me on email or Twitter.
Thank you, Cassie.
You are very welcome. Thanks everybody for hanging out and like checking out data, which, woohoo on a Friday morning.
All right. I'll give it a couple more minutes and then I will be closing the session.
Sounds perfect. This is one that I really like doing in person too, just because it does give the opportunity for people to try things more. It's harder when I know they're on a screen and I don't know if they can actually try it or not.
Well, it's hard unless you have two monitors and it can be challenging.
That's what's nice about this one in person is people can actually be trying it and then they find all the things that are not working well for them or they have questions on the spot. So it's a little bit harder digitally for this one, but it's still useful.
Well, it is. It's very useful. So, well, thank you. I'm going to end the session now because we have to get ready for the next session. So
Sounds
thank you
wonderful.
very
Thank
much
you so much
for speaking. Thank you.
Thanks.